My name is Mary Collins. I'm 32 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. If you met me today, you'd probably think I'm someone who has everything under control. I have a steady job, a small apartment filled with plants, and a quiet routine that keeps my life calm and predictable. But family has always been the one place where nothing ever felt calm. Growing up, there were two of us, me and my older brother, Daniel. Daniel was 3 years older, confident, loud, and somehow always right about everything. At least, that's how my parents saw it. In our house, Daniel wasn't just the older sibling. He was the golden child. And I was the sensitive one. That's what my parents called me whenever something upset me. Mary, you're just being too sensitive, my mom would say, waving her hand dismissively. It didn't matter what happened. If Daniel broke something and blamed me, I was too sensitive. If he teased me in front of his friends, I was too sensitive. If I cried when something felt unfair, I was definitely too sensitive. I remember one moment very clearly. I must have been about 10 years old. Daniel had borrowed my bike without asking and left it outside during a rainstorm. By the next morning, the chain had rusted and the seat was soaked. When Dad found out, he looked straight at me. Mary, you shouldn't make such a big deal out of little things. Little things. That phrase followed me through most of my childhood. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed to glide through life with applause following him everywhere. He scored a goal in soccer, my parents threw a celebration dinner. He got average grades. That's okay, Daniel is just focused on bigger things. But when I brought home straight A's once, my mom smiled politely and said, "That's nice, Mary." That was it. I learned pretty early that being quiet was easier than being disappointed. So I kept my feelings to myself. Years passed. Daniel eventually joined our dad's small construction business right after high school. By the time he was in his 20s, everyone in the family talked about him like he was some kind of business genius. Daniel is going to take this company to the next level, my dad would proudly say at family gatherings. Meanwhile, I took a completely different path. I studied design and ended up working for a small marketing agency in Portland. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the creative freedom. I loved building something that felt like mine. But to my family, it never seemed to count. Every holiday, every birthday dinner, every family gathering followed the same pattern. Someone would ask Daniel about the business, and he would lean back in his chair, smiling like a CEO giving a press conference. "Oh yeah, things are booming," he'd say. My dad would nod proudly. And then, eventually, someone would turn to me. "So, Mary, how's that little job of yours going?" Little job. I used to try explaining my projects, the campaigns I worked on, the clients I helped, but halfway through, I'd notice people losing interest. Daniel would often interrupt with a joke. "You know Mary spends all day picking colors and fonts, right?" Everyone would laugh, even my parents. And every time that happened, I felt myself shrink a little smaller in my chair. The worst part wasn't the jokes, it was how normal they had become. By the time I turned 30, I'd learned to brace myself whenever I drove to my parents' house. The house itself hadn't changed much since we were kids. Same white siding, same creaky porch steps, same wind chimes that clinked softly whenever the breeze passed through. But walking through that front door still made me feel like I was 10 years old again, like I was the extra piece in a puzzle that didn't quite fit. One particular Sunday dinner changed something for me. It started like every other gathering. My mom had cooked her usual roast chicken, the smell filling the kitchen as relatives chatted around the dining table. My dad was pouring drinks, and Daniel was already talking loudly about new expansion plans for the business. His wife, Melissa, sat beside him scrolling through her phone, occasionally nodding like everything he said was brilliant. I took a quiet seat at the end of the table. Dinner started normally. Plates clinked, conversations overlapped. My dad asked Daniel about a new construction project he claimed to be working on. Daniel leaned back with that familiar, confident grin. Oh, yeah, it's a huge deal. Honestly, if things keep going like this, I might be running the biggest company in the county soon. My parents looked impressed. Then my mom turned to me. So, Mary, still working at that agency? Yeah, we just finished a campaign for a local bookstore chain. It actually went really well. Before I could continue, Daniel chuckled. A bookstore campaign, he said. Wow, big stuff. A few people laughed. I forced a small smile. But Daniel wasn't finished. He raised his glass dramatically. Here's to Mary, proof that you can get a fancy degree and still end up designing flyers. The table burst into laughter. Even my dad, even my mom. For a moment, I just stared down at my plate. The roasted potatoes blurred in my vision. I felt that familiar pressure building behind my eyes. And then Daniel added one more line. Hey, at least someone in the family has time to play with colors all day. That was the moment something inside me quietly snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. I stood up from the table. I think I'm going to head out, I said. My mom frowned. Already? Daniel smirked. See? Too sensitive. The word hung in the air like an old label I had been wearing my entire life. But this time, I didn't argue. I just grabbed my bag and walked out. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch. For a moment, I stood there, listening to the faint sound of laughter still coming from inside the house. Then I walked to my car. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual. Street lights passed in slow golden blurs, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to think something I had always been afraid to admit. Maybe I didn't need them in my life as much as I thought. Maybe distance wasn't cruel. Maybe it was necessary. When I finally reached my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed on the couch. The silence felt peaceful, healing even. But the next morning, something happened that made everything far more complicated. I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was a message, not from my parents, not from Daniel. It was from someone I didn't know. The text read, "Hi Mary, you don't know me, but I used to work for your brother. I think you should know something about Daniel's business because things aren't what they seem." I sat up slowly. My heart started beating faster as I read the message again. And then another notification popped up. A second message. Your family deserves to know the truth. The cracks in the perfect life. The message stayed on my screen for a long time. I must have read it at least 10 times. Hi, Mary. You don't know me, but I used to work for your brother. I think you should know something about Daniel's business, because things aren't what they seem. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the person meant to text someone else, or maybe it was a prank. I sat up in bed, the early morning light creeping through my curtains, and stared at the unfamiliar phone number. Another message followed. Your family deserves to know the truth. My stomach tightened. There was something about the tone that didn't feel like a joke. I typed slowly. Who is this? A few seconds passed. Then the reply came. My name is Kevin. I worked for Daniel for almost 2 years. I frowned. The name didn't sound familiar. Daniel talked about his business constantly, but he almost never mentioned the people who worked for him. To him, employees were just part of the background. I hesitated before replying. What do you mean things aren't what they seem? There was a pause, long enough that I started wondering if the conversation was over. Then the typing bubble appeared again. I don't want to get involved in family drama, Kevin wrote, but people haven't been paid properly. Some of us left because the company couldn't cover basic expenses. My heart skipped. That didn't make sense. Daniel never stopped bragging about how successful the business was. Every family dinner, every conversation, he talked about expansion, new projects, big contracts. It was all he ever talked about. I stared at the message again. People haven't been paid properly. I typed back. Are you sure you have the right person? My brother's business is doing really well. Three dots appeared almost instantly. Then Kevin sent another message. That's what he tells people. A photo followed. I opened it. It looked like a document, an email thread discussing delayed paychecks. One line stood out. This is the third week in a row Daniel said payment is coming soon. I felt a strange, uneasy sensation settle in my chest. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything. Maybe it was just a temporary issue. Every business has problems sometimes. But another part of me, the part that had spent years quietly observing things, couldn't ignore the possibility. Daniel always talked big, but he also had a habit of ignoring problems until they exploded. I set my phone down and walked to the kitchen. The coffee machine hummed softly as it brewed. Outside, Portland was waking up. Cars passing, distant footsteps on the sidewalk, someone walking their dog down the street. Normal life. But my mind kept replaying Kevin's message. When my coffee finished brewing, I picked up my phone again. There was one more text. I'm not saying this to hurt anyone, but if things keep going like this, people are going to ask questions. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't respond. Instead, I got dressed and tried to focus on work. But the entire day felt strange. At the marketing agency, my coworkers were discussing a new project, brainstorming ideas for a local cafe campaign. Normally, I loved these meetings, but that morning, my mind kept drifting. Every time someone mentioned budgets or business planning, Daniel's voice echoed in my head. I might be running the biggest company in the county soon. The confidence, the arrogance, the way everyone believed him. By lunchtime, I still couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, I called my mom. She answered after 2 rings. "Hi, honey, how's work?" "Good," I said automatically. There was a short pause. Then she added, "Well, you know how your brother jokes. Don't take everything so seriously." Too sensitive. The familiar phrase echoed again. But this time, I didn't argue. Instead, I asked casually, "How's Daniel doing lately with the business?" My mom immediately brightened. "Oh, wonderful! He's so busy these days, always working on something big." Of course, that's what Daniel told everyone. I almost mentioned Kevin's message, but something stopped me. If I brought it up, my mom would probably defend Daniel instantly. She always had. So instead, I said, "That's good." After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen. Something felt off. Not just about the message, about everything. For years, Daniel had been the untouchable success story of the family, the golden child who could do no wrong. But what if that image wasn't real? The thought felt strange, dangerous even. That weekend, I ended up back at my parents' house again. Not because I wanted to go, but because my mom insisted. "Just a small dinner," she said on the phone. "Daniel and Melissa will be there." Of course they would. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's truck was already parked outside. I took a deep breath before walking in. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the house. Inside, my parents were setting the table. Daniel stood near the kitchen counter talking on his phone. He looked tense. That was new. Usually, he radiated confidence, but now his voice sounded sharper. "Just tell them the payment is coming next week," he muttered into the phone. He turned slightly and noticed me. His expression shifted instantly. The confident grin returned like someone flipping a switch. He hung up the phone. "Well, if it isn't my favorite designer," he joked. I forced a polite smile. "Hi, Daniel." Melissa walked in from the living room and gave me a quick hug. Dinner started soon after that. At first, everything seemed normal, but as the evening went on, I noticed small things. Daniel kept checking his phone. His knee bounced under the table, and once, when my dad asked about the business, Daniel hesitated for half a second before answering. "Everything's great," he said quickly, "just busy." The words sounded rehearsed. Then something else caught my attention. Near the kitchen counter was a stack of envelopes. One of them had a bright red stamp, past due. Daniel noticed me looking. He quickly moved the papers aside. The room felt a little quieter after that. Later that night, as we were clearing the table, I tried something I normally wouldn't. I spoke carefully. Daniel, running a business must be stressful sometimes. He shrugged. Not really. Everyone has challenges, though, I continued. If you ever needed help with marketing ideas or... Before I could finish, Daniel laughed. Not a friendly laugh, a sharp one. Oh, please, he said. I don't need advice from someone who designs bookstore posters. The room went silent. Melissa looked down at her plate. My mom pretended to wipe the counter, and my dad stared at his glass. I felt the familiar sting of embarrassment, but this time something else was mixed with it. Suspicion. Because now I had seen the red stamp, the nervous phone call, the restless tapping of his knee. Daniel leaned back in his chair. You don't understand how real business works, Mary. Maybe he was right, but something about his confidence felt fragile, like a wall with cracks forming beneath the paint. That night, as I was driving home again, my phone buzzed. Another message from Kevin. This time, it was just one sentence. The company might close temporarily next week. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Because if that was true, then Daniel's perfect life was about to fall apart, and the entire family was about to find out. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that Kevin was exaggerating. Maybe he was a disgruntled former employee. Maybe he was angry at Daniel and trying to cause trouble. But the uneasy feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected another message. Strangely, Kevin didn't text again after that last line. The company might close temporarily next week. The silence that followed felt almost heavier than the messages themselves. By Wednesday morning, the tension finally broke. I was at my desk at the marketing agency when my phone started ringing. It was my mom. That alone wasn't unusual, but when I answered, I immediately knew something was wrong. Her voice sounded shaky. Mary, have you talked to your brother today? No, I said, sitting up straighter. Why? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she said quietly, something strange is happening. My heart started beating faster. What do you mean? Well, your father stopped by the company office this morning, she said. The building was closed. Closed? I repeated. Yes, she said nervously. The doors were locked and there was a sign on the front. I stood up from my chair. What kind of sign? Her voice dropped lower. It said the business is temporarily closed due to operational issues. For a moment, the entire office around me faded into background noise. Kevin's message echoed in my head. The company might close temporarily next week. Did you call Daniel? I asked. Yes, she said quickly. He said everything is fine and we shouldn't worry. Of course he did. That was Daniel's favorite strategy. Deny first, explain later. But this time something felt different. My mom continued, Your father is really confused. He thought Daniel had several big projects going. I swallowed. Maybe it's just a short delay, I said carefully. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. After we hung up, I couldn't focus on work anymore. By lunchtime, rumors had already started spreading through the town. Small communities have a way of sharing information quickly. Someone mentioned the construction company closing. Someone else said employees had been leaving for weeks. Another person said payments for suppliers had been delayed. Every new piece of gossip felt like another crack forming in Daniel's perfect image. That evening, my dad called. He almost never called me directly. Usually, my mom handled family communication, which meant this had to be serious. Mary, he said the moment I answered. He sounded tense. Yes? He went back to the office today. And it's empty. My stomach dropped. What do you mean empty? Half the desks are gone, he said. A few workers were there packing equipment. They said they'd been laid off. Laid off. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. My dad sounded confused more than angry. I don't understand, he continued. Daniel told me the company was expanding. I didn't know what to say, because I had heard those same words dozens of times.
but now they sounded hollow. "Did you talk to him?" I asked. "Yes," my dad replied. "He said it's just a temporary situation." Another pause. Then he added quietly, "But he didn't sound like himself." That night, our family group chat suddenly became active. My mom sent a message. "Daniel, your father says the office is closed. What's going on?" Several minutes passed before Daniel replied. "Just some restructuring. Everything is under control." Typical Daniel. Confident, short, final. But this time, the response didn't calm anyone. My aunt chimed in next. "I heard some workers weren't paid." Daniel's reply came quickly. "That's nonsense." I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to stay quiet like I always had, but another part of me felt something different. Years of silence had built up inside me, and now things were unraveling anyway. So I typed a message. "Daniel, are you sure everything is okay?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his response popped up. "Mary, don't start." Just 4 words, but the tone was unmistakable, dismissive, the same way he had spoken to me my entire life. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was my mom. This time, she sounded much worse. "Mary, I just spoke to Daniel's wife." "Melissa?" "Yes." "What did she say?" My mom's voice trembled. "She said things have been difficult for months." My heart sank. Months. Daniel had been hiding it for months. "Difficult how?" I asked. "She didn't give details," my mom said, but she sounded exhausted. I could picture Melissa sitting at their kitchen table, probably staring at unpaid bills, all while Daniel continued pretending everything was perfect. Later that night, another message appeared in the family chat, this time from Daniel. "Everyone needs to relax. Businesses go through phases. I'll fix it." I stared at the message for a long time. For once, no one replied immediately. The silence felt heavy, because deep down, everyone was starting to realize something. The golden child might not be so perfect after all. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Kevin. My chest tightened as I opened it. "I heard the office closed today." I typed back slowly. "Yes." A moment later, he replied, "Then the truth is probably coming out soon." I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "What truth?" I typed. The typing bubble appeared, then stopped, then appeared again. Finally, Kevin sent one last message. "Your brother didn't just make a few mistakes." My heart pounded as I read the next line. "He made decisions that could cost your entire family everything." Kevin's message stayed in my mind for the rest of the night. He made decisions that could cost your entire family everything. I must have read it 20 times, but no matter how many times I read it, the meaning didn't change. Something serious had happened, something Daniel had been hiding. The next few days felt like a slow unraveling of everything my family believed about him. The rumors around town grew louder. At first, it was quiet whispers. Then it turned into open conversations. Someone at my office mentioned that a construction company had suddenly stopped paying suppliers. A local cafe owner said he knew workers who hadn't received their final paychecks. Every story seemed to point back to the same place, Daniel's company. But the real explosion happened on Sunday. My mom called early that morning. Her voice sounded urgent. "Mary, we're having a family meeting today." "A meeting?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Your father spoke to Daniel again last night. He wants everyone here." Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. This wasn't going to be a normal dinner. By the time I arrived at my parents' house, the driveway was already full. Daniel's truck sat near the garage. Melissa's car was parked beside it. Even my aunt and uncle were there. The atmosphere inside the house felt tense. No music, no casual chatter, just quiet voices and nervous glances. Daniel sat at the dining table staring down at his phone. For the first time in my life, he didn't look confident. His shoulders were slumped, his jaw was tight. Melissa sat beside him, looking exhausted. My dad stood near the window with his arms crossed. My mom paced slowly near the kitchen counter. When I walked in, everyone looked up. "Good," my dad said quietly. "Now we can talk." We all sat down. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then my dad looked directly at Daniel. "Start explaining." Daniel sighed heavily. "It's not as dramatic as everyone thinks," he muttered. My dad didn't move. "The office is closed," he said. "Workers are leaving. Suppliers are calling me asking where their money is." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "It's temporary." That word again. Temporary. But my dad's patience was gone. "Temporary?" he repeated sharply. "Then why did the bank call me yesterday?" The room went completely silent. I felt my stomach drop. Daniel looked up slowly. "What bank?" he asked. My dad's voice grew harder. "The bank that gave the loan using this house as collateral." For a moment, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mom froze. "What?" she whispered. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, because suddenly Kevin's warning made terrifying sense. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It was just a business loan," he said quickly. My dad slammed his hand on the table. "You used my house as collateral without telling us?" My mom's face went pale. "Daniel, tell me that's not true." Daniel didn't answer right away. And that silence said everything. Melissa finally spoke, her voice quiet but strained. He said it was necessary to keep the company growing. My dad stared at Daniel in disbelief. How much? Daniel hesitated. Then he muttered a number. The room erupted. My aunt gasped. My mom grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Even I felt dizzy hearing it. It was far more money than I had imagined. My dad's voice dropped into a dangerous calm. And the business can't pay it back. Daniel looked down. It will, he said weakly. When? My dad demanded. No answer. For years, my parents had defended Daniel. Every mistake, every argument, every complaint anyone had about him. But now the truth was sitting right there on the table, and it was impossible to ignore. My mom finally spoke again. Her voice trembled. Daniel, why didn't you tell us the business was struggling? Daniel's reply came quickly. Because it wasn't supposed to struggle. He ran a hand through his hair. I invested in a few bigger projects, took some risks. That's how businesses grow. But you didn't listen to anyone, Melissa said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Tears were forming in her eyes. You ignored your manager when he warned you, she continued. You ignored the accountant. You ignored the workers. Daniel snapped. I was trying to save the company. My dad shook his head slowly. No, he said. You were trying to protect your pride. The words hung in the air like a verdict. For the first time in my life, Daniel didn't have a comeback. He just sat there, quiet. And suddenly I realized something. The golden child had never learned how to admit he was wrong, because nobody had ever forced him to.
My mom sank into a chair. All these years, she whispered, we thought everything was perfect. No one spoke. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Daniel did something I never expected. He looked at me, not with arrogance, not with sarcasm, but with something close to defeat. You probably think this is karma, he said quietly. I didn't answer right away, because honestly, part of me did. Years of arrogance, years of belittling others, years of pretending he was better than everyone. But seeing him sitting there now, broken and embarrassed, it didn't feel satisfying. It just felt sad. I think, I said slowly, that sometimes people learn things the hard way. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Well, he said, looks like I'm learning. The room fell silent again. But then my dad leaned forward. So what's your plan now? Daniel looked around the table, at his worried parents, at his exhausted wife, at me. And for the first time, his voice sounded honest. I have to fix this. My dad frowned. How? Daniel took a deep breath. I'm going to sell the company. Everyone froze, because no one had expected that. The business had been Daniel's entire identity, the thing he bragged about, the thing he used to prove he was successful. But now, he was letting it go. And something about that moment made it clear. The lesson had finally hit him. Hard. But just when it seemed like the worst was already revealed, Daniel said something that shocked everyone in the room. There's one more thing you should know. And the way his voice shook told me the story wasn't over yet. When Daniel said, there's one more thing you should know, the entire room froze again. No one moved. No one spoke. The tension felt heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm finally breaks. My dad leaned forward slowly. What else? He asked. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. For the first time in my life, my older brother looked completely lost. Not confident, not arrogant, just tired. There are still some unpaid suppliers, he said quietly. If the company shuts down the wrong way, they could take legal action. My mom gasped softly. And the loan? My dad asked. Daniel swallowed. If I sell the company equipment and the remaining contracts, it might cover most of it. Might. That word didn't sound reassuring. Melissa placed a hand gently on Daniel's arm. We're already talking to a financial advisor, she said, trying to figure out the best way forward. My dad walked slowly to the window. For a moment, he didn't say anything. I could see the frustration in his posture. But underneath it, there was something else too. Disappointment. Daniel, he finally said, why didn't you come to us months ago? Daniel stared at the table. Because I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. That answer was painfully familiar. Daniel had spent his entire life believing he had to look strong. Perfect. Untouchable. Admitting failure had never been part of the plan.
but life doesn't always follow the plan. My mom finally spoke again. Her voice was softer now. We would have helped you. Daniel looked up slowly. I know, he said, and that's exactly why I didn't want to ask. The room went quiet again, because suddenly we all understood something. Daniel hadn't just been hiding the truth. He had been trying to protect the image everyone expected him to live up to. The perfect son, the successful businessman, the golden child. But that image had slowly become a trap. My dad turned around. Well, he said, the important thing now is fixing the damage. Daniel nodded. I already started making calls, he said, selling equipment, negotiating with suppliers. If everything goes right, the loan can be paid off within a year. My mom looked relieved, though still shaken. And the employees, she asked. Daniel sighed. I'm trying to make sure they get what they're owed first. That answer surprised me. A week ago, Daniel would have been focused only on saving his reputation. But something had clearly changed. The pressure had forced him to see the real consequences of his choices. For the first time, he was thinking about other people. A few minutes later, the tension in the room slowly began to ease. Not completely, but enough for everyone to breathe again. Then Daniel did something else unexpected. He turned toward me. Mary, he said quietly. I looked up. There was no sarcasm in his voice this time. No teasing. No arrogance. I owe you an apology. The words felt strange coming from him. My parents looked surprised too. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I've spent years acting like I was better than you, he said. Like your career didn't matter. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. And now look at me. I didn't know what to say, because part of me had imagined this moment before. The moment when Daniel would finally admit he had been wrong. But it didn't feel like victory. It just felt honest. I shouldn't have treated you that way, he continued. You've actually built something stable, something real. I shrugged slightly. We all make mistakes, I said. Daniel smiled weakly. Yeah, but some of mine were pretty big. That was probably the understatement of the year. Over the next few months, things slowly began to change. Daniel sold most of the company's assets. It wasn't easy. He had to give up the office, the equipment, even the brand name he had spent years building. But little by little, the debts started getting paid. Suppliers received their money. Former employees were contacted and compensated where possible. The process was long and humbling, but it was also something Daniel had never experienced before. Accountability. Our parents changed too. For years, they had defended Daniel without question. But after everything that happened, they started seeing things differently. One evening, my mom called me. Mary, she said gently, I think we owe you an apology too. I was surprised. For what? For not always listening to you, she said. We were so focused on being proud of Daniel that we didn't realize how often you were overlooked. Hearing that meant more than I expected. Because sometimes the hardest thing about family isn't the conflict. It's the feeling of being invisible. But things were different now. Daniel eventually found a new job working with a smaller construction firm. This time, he wasn't the boss. He wasn't making big speeches about expansion plans. He was just working, learning, rebuilding. And strangely enough, he seemed happier, more relaxed, more real. A few months later, we had another family dinner. Same house, same table, same roast chicken my mom always made. But the atmosphere felt completely different. Daniel wasn't dominating the conversation. Instead, he asked questions. He even asked about my work. So that bookstore campaign, he said, did it actually help their sales? I smiled. Yeah, they opened 2 new locations. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's impressive. Hearing that from him still felt a little surreal, but I could tell he meant it. Later that night, as I drove home, I thought about everything that happened. For years, I had imagined karma as some dramatic moment, some kind of revenge. But real life didn't work that way. Karma wasn't about destroying someone. It was about consequences, about lessons that arrive whether we're ready for them or not. Daniel had learned his the hard way. But in the end, maybe that was exactly what he needed. And maybe the rest of us needed it too. Because sometimes the fall from the top is the only thing that teaches someone how to stand properly again. And for the first time in a long time, our family finally felt real.